Welcome back. This is Jenny Cochran with Fullness of Grace. And again, we have Father Quan Tran here to talk to us about the seven deadly sins. So we're in part two. And where would you like to start?
Well, should we just jump into our next one, which is gluttony. Now we're talking about the sensual vices. Sensual pleasures were given to us as a good thing, but because of our fallen human nature, we tend to go to the extreme, right? It becomes inordinate, it becomes unhealthy, it becomes sinful. So the first sensual vice is gluttony. This is excessive appetite for the pleasure of food and drink. Excessive appetite for the pleasure of food and drink. We don't know when to stop. It becomes unhealthy. It becomes excessive, whether it be food or drink. We just want more and more. We crave it and we desire it, and it gets to a point of out of control, right? We can't refrain ourselves. We can't stop, and it becomes unhealthy in many ways.
I know that many people struggle with overeating or addictions to many, many things. What would you suggest that they do to break those kind of addictions or that gluttony that they're dealing with?
There's a lot involved, just like sloth, just like apathy. There's depression, and there's pathology involved. And so, but in terms of gluttony, there are elements of that as well. But in terms of what we can do is to exercise the virtue of temperance, of moderation. I know that's almost unheard of nowadays, right? Because everything is extreme, to the max. Go to the extreme. Don't hold back, kind of thing. If it feels good, do it, kind of thing. And so this is such an essential virtue, is temperance, moderation. Just knowing, because we need to exercise control over our sensual desires, right? We can't just give them free rein, because they can cause a lot of damage to ourselves and to others, right? Because we have inordinate desires that are not healthy, that are harmful to us and to others and to our relationship with God. And so and it's just, okay, if you know you're weak, you try to, I guess, avoid the near occasion of sin as well, right?
Yep.
Don't put all the candy bars and the chips right there in the open where that's going to tempt you. But just put them away. Maybe try to do something else. I mean, because when, of course, we're hungry, we want to grab that candy bar or whatever. We have to practice self-control. We can't just give in to every thought, every impulse, every desire. We have to have mastery over our free will. And God has given us free will, but now we've become slaves to our impulses, our desires. And so gluttony, yes, just have enough food. Don't order the supersize, right? Nowadays, everywhere you go, the portions are enormous, right? That's enough for like 3 people, 3 meals. And think of it as in a spiritual way, right? God has given me this meal. I'm going to enjoy it in a way that's glorifying Him. Remember St. Paul? He says, whatever you do, whether you eat or drink, do it for the glory of God, right? And so I'm going to enjoy this meal and give thanks to God. I'm going to give thanks to the cook who prepared it, or myself, or whatever. Just enjoy it for what it is, rather than going overboard. And also just remember our dignity as human beings. Right? We're made in the image and likeness of God. We're not animals, right? I mean, I used to have dogs, and when I would put down the food, they would just go crazy, right? We're not like that. We're human beings. We have hopefully self-restraint, and so and yeah, just to think, just imagine that God is there with you. So share that meal with Him, enjoy it, think about it in a spiritual sense.
I have found for myself also that prayer is really helpful, and for the deadly sins that I face, is asking for the grace and living a grace-filled life, which is really the whole topic of fullness of grace. But asking for the grace to have that temperance, or asking for the grace to have the humility, and I've been amazed in my life how that's really helped me. And in times of temptation, if I just say a prayer, a Hail Mary or something like that, it really helps a lot.
Yes. You know, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, because a lot of times on our own we can't do it. But
Yeah.
God will give you the grace, and you have to rely on His grace, saying, okay, God, I'm really going to try to fast, but I need your help. I know on my own I can't do it. And He'll give you the grace. You're right. That's that supernatural aspect that we need to tap into. And you know, some of the offspring that this brings about is kind of interesting. One is dull-wittedness. You know, we can't.
Dull-wittedness.
Yes, I mean, it is what it sounds like. Is that you know what happens when you've eaten too much, right? You can't. You're sleepy, right? You can't process information. You can't understand. You can't make good decisions because you know all that blood is rushing to your stomach to digest the food. So yeah, so people who suffer from gluttony tend to be suffer from dull-wittedness. And yeah, some of these expressions I got from Thomas Aquinas. And another one, very interesting, is buffoonery. Do you know what buffoonery is?
No.
It's it's inappropriate playfulness.
Okay.
So.
Sort of being like a joker or.
Yeah, but inappropriately.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there's there's humor that's appropriate, but yeah. So people who tend to get out of control with food, they tend to get out of control with humor too.
Oh, wow.
You know, there are things that are just inappropriate. You shouldn't be doing, and so that's an offspring of gluttony. And another one is loquaciousness. Do you know what that is?
Speaking too much.
Yes. And just overly talkative. Right. So again, just a little out of control with eating and with talking and joking around inappropriately. So
not really controlling your body.
Really,
You know,
just out of control.
All around.
Just impulsive and just a lack of control and decorum.
So what would be the opposite virtue then?
I think we talked about it, which is
I must be having dull-wittedness right now.
It is after lunch, right?
It is, but it's Friday.
We got to stop doing these videos in the afternoon. Right. So
temperance. Okay.
Temperance, moderation, is the opposite virtue. And the thing is, habits. You know, practice makes perfect, right? The more you exercise control, the more self-control you'll have. Then it just becomes a habit. Yeah, I'm just gonna eat this, and then that's it. Or you know.
Okay, great. So our next one is a big one.
Yes, this one I think a lot of people can identify with, especially in our culture nowadays, is lust, another sensual vice. This is an inordinate desire for sexual pleasure. This inordinate, something that was made for good, right? It is supposed to be pleasurable, so that a woman and a man and a wife, right, spouses will procreate, right, and to join in their union as a married couple. But now we're using it as recreation, right? It's just for my stimulation, my sexual gratification, and then it becomes obsessive too. I can never get enough. People are addicted to sex, addicted to pornography, just constantly. Viewing other people as sexual objects, right? Just constantly looking at people and fantasizing and all kinds of stuff. And so this is a huge problem, you know, with the internet, with just these images everywhere. We see all these images that are tapping into our capacity to sin and to lust. And so.
And how do you find people breaking that habit? They're so difficult right now. It's huge. These problems.
Yes, it is a huge problem, and so it takes the supernatural level and the natural level. So the natural level is we have to exercise discipline. We have to avoid the near occasion of sin, right? I hear this all the time. You know, people telling me that they end up having sex outside of marriage. Well, do you have a boyfriend? Yes. Well, you know, right? When you get together and one thing leads to another, it happens.
Yeah.
Well, if you know that, then you need to stop at some point, right? You know, if you go over to his house late at night and, you know, blah, 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 things are going to happen, then, well, then at some point you got to stop. Say, no,
Yeah.
And so you have to avoid the near occasion of sin. You have to exercise that prudence, that judgment, that discipline, right? Right. Avoid the computer, and nowadays with the phone, and so a lot of times I tell people is when you're tempted, put down the computer, avoid the near occasion, whatever, pick up a rosary. Go to another room and start praying.
Yeah.
Because people are automatically, they respond to a trigger, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? They get tempted and then they just give in to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I said no, because then it becomes a habit. And then I said no. When you're tempted, grab a rosary, go for a walk, pray, and then eventually you'll break the habit. And then there's the supernatural aspect. Ask God to help you, give you the grace to not fall into lust and to break this habit, to break this addiction to lust.
Use your screensaver as an image of Christ,
Right.
or an icons. Have secret icons by your computers so that you can see how we're created in the image of God and the beauty of God's face shining upon you, and maybe that will help too.
Yeah, St. Paul speaks about, he says, whatever is good, whatever is gracious, whatever is beautiful, whatever is true, whatever is good, whatever has any excellence, think about these things, right?
Yeah.
So that's why I surround my office and my home with religious images, right? God, Mary, the saints, beautiful things, flowers, and that's one thing we should, decorate our homes and our offices with. Just beautiful religious images helps us to think about holy things, to elevate our thoughts, our desires, rather than the base sexual,
Desires,
graphic
yeah.
things.
And I'm guessing I know what the opposite virtue is.
What's that?
Chastity.
Chastity, right. Chastity
Yeah.
is the opposite virtue. It's a peaceful integration of sexual thoughts, feelings, and desires, right? We're really called to self-mastery. We are sexual beings, but we don't have to be a slave to our sexual desires and impulses. And that's another thing too, is, we really have to control our imagination. Because a lot of lusts and things, because Jesus says, right, if you've looked at a woman lustfully, you've already committed adultery in your heart. And so we have to be aware of our imagination, our thoughts, because it starts there, and it builds up, and it leads to actions. Actions lead to sin. It leads to a habit, and a way of life. And so we have to be careful of our thoughts and our imaginations. And that's what chastity is, to live out and everyone is called to chastity, right? Whether you be in a married life or a priest, is to live chastely. And the offsprings of lust is imprudence. I don't know if you've heard of this before, but it's really true. People who give in to lust, they can't think clearly. They make really bad choices. It really clouds your mind and clouds your judgment. And being a former DA, I see this all the time. And even watching some of these crime shows on TV, it starts with one partner, one spouse having a sexual affair, right, with somebody else. They're giving in to lust, and then before you know it, the next thing is they're plotting the murder of their spouse to get the insurance money or something like that. Why don't you just divorce him? I mean, not that we're promoting divorce, but right?
Yeah.
And that's just one example of people just doing crazy things when they're engaged in lust. Right? They rob banks, they kill people, they commit fraud, and they end up living their whole life in prison, or because and it starts with lust. It just really clouds the judgment. You can't think straight, and you just do stupid, incredibly idiotic things.
Wow, I had no idea that was the root of it, of so much violence.
Right. I mean, it's not always lust, but lust is a big contributor of crimes, other types of crimes.
Wow. Okay, anger.
All right.
Our last
one, anger.
sin.
And I think a lot of people can relate to this too, because it's so prevalent in our society. We see this with individuals, within marriages, the workplace, everywhere. There's so much rage and anger. So anger occurs when we feel we've been injured, and there's this impulse to lash out, to lash back. usually at the source of that injustice. And so, and there is righteous anger, you know, when we've been unfairly treated, where there's been an injustice. Yes, you know, even Jesus was angry, and but this sin, this is inappropriate anger. It becomes a vice when either one, it's unreasonably felt, right? Like there really was no damage, and you're just way overreacting, right?
Yeah.
And so that's one form of anger. Another one is when the retaliation is disproportionate. Right? So I mean, a lot of times the two will go together. Yeah, one is like people, they get angry, and like a lot of times, well, I didn't mean anything, I didn't do anything, you know, and people fly off the handle, and so it's that's an unreasonable perception that there was an injustice there, and then the response is just disproportionate, right? Violence, throwing things, destruction, words even, right? If you feel like you've been harmed, insulted, or offended, you know, at least talk about it, or, you know. And so anger is when so either when it's unreasonably felt or the response is just completely disproportionate, then it becomes sinful and a vice.
It's really sad, but this is so common for the simplest, smallest things, you know, like someone cuts you off on the freeway, and, you know, all of a sudden there's all sorts of swearing, and that person may have been totally oblivious to that and totally made a mistake. Or you're at the grocery store and people are furious about, you know, the long wait of waiting 5 minutes. You know, it's really sad that we're so out of control in this area.
Right. And so that kind of points to the virtue then. The opposite virtue is really patience. Is really patience. Yeah, if we're angry, we just need to learn just to be more patient. Just to put up with things, put up with annoyances, offenses, perceived injustice. And so patience is a big thing. Another thing is gentleness, right? Meekness, gentleness. Okay, I don't need to respond with violence or expletives. Just at least tell the person, you know, what you did to me, was wrong. And then there's forgiveness. You know, there ultimately it comes down to forgiveness. Sometimes we do forgive people. People have wronged us, and we do need to forgive people. So anger, you know, when anger arises in us, we kind of not think of the other person as a human being anymore. You know, like we forget their humanity. All of a sudden, they're like the devil, right? Right? We just think of them as they're no longer human. They have no redeeming quality whatsoever because they did something to us, right?
Yeah.
And so it's again, we have to kind of go back to empathy, gentleness, and forgiveness.
The one thing I love about studying the virtues in particular is that these are all areas that we can work on and improve on. And so it's not like a black and white, either you have temperance or you don't, but by working towards something, we can actually improve in these areas.
Right.
And so we become better, quote, versions of ourselves as we improve in these areas.
Exactly. And this is how, you know, we have free will, right? We can choose. We don't have to respond with anger or with violence or insults. We can choose to bite our tongue, to walk away, and so yeah. So practice makes perfect, right? So again, it's a combination of God's grace. God will give us the grace, and we do need God's grace. But then we still have to do our part. We have to make an effort. So that's why we're doing this video, so that people are aware of their tendencies. So each one of us has at least one area, one of these 7 deadly sins we tend to commit over and over again. It's a sort of like an inner attitude, like it's a deep-seated disposition, and it brings up all the other sins. So we know that. So there may be more than one. There may be a couple that we're struggling with, or maybe even more. So it's good to be honest, right? During this time of Lent, a time for conversion, a time to really it's important for us to know ourselves and to be honest with ourselves, between us and God. And again, maybe you can go to God in prayer and say, God, which of these do you think I'm suffering from, I'm struggling with? And so help me to identify them, help me to be honest, and then so that I can work on them. and to practice the virtue. So that's why we talk about the opposite virtue, because there is hope, there is mercy, right? We have this image of the divine mercy here. And so we need to trust in God's forgiveness and His grace so that we may be perfected.
I really appreciate the topic of this video at this particular time, at the beginning of Lent, because as we think about things to give up, whether it's candy or alcohol or whatever we want to give up for Lent, why don't we look inside at these type of problems that we have, and create our action plan for Lent based on that. I struggle with greed. Okay, I'm going to work on generosity during Lent, and that is going to be what I'm going to focus on, as opposed to like just giving up chocolate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, this is very practical, and so yes, see where you're struggling, and then look at the opposite virtues, and then try to practice those virtues, and then it becomes a habit. Then we're able to be freed from the capital vice or deadly sin.
Sounds great. Well, thank you for watching, and this has been Fullness of Grace.